You're listening to Fire Ecology Chats, a podcast series by the Association for Fire Ecology.
Hey, welcome everybody. My name is Bob Keane. I'm the editor-in-chief of the internationally renowned journal Fire Ecology. Fire Ecology is a scientific journal on fire ecology that is published by Springer Nature and overseen by the Association for Fire Ecology, or AFE. Today, we're going to talk about a very important paper, Temporal and Spatial Pattern Analysis of Escape Prescribed Fires in California from 1991 to 2020. We have two great people that gave and donated their time to talk about this paper, Shu Lee and Rob York. Shu Lee, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me. I'm Shu Li, and I'm a PhD candidate in civil and environmental engineering at UC Irvine.
Wonderful. Welcome, Shu Lee. And Rob, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Bob. I am an associate professor of cooperative extension at UC Berkeley.
Well, welcome both of you. Incredibly fun paper to read. Really interesting results. Shu Lee, could you give us the background of why you decided to do this study and why you wrote the paper?
Yeah, thank you. So we did this study because we're at a critical moment in wildfire management in California, and much of the Western United States has seen the unprecedented wildfire activities in recent decades. And that's due to a combination of climate change, accumulated fuels from over a century of fire suppression, and the expanding development into fire-prone areas. One of the most effective tools we have to reduce wildfire severity is prescribed burn, which means we intentionally setting low-intensity fires under controlled conditions to reduce the fuel buildup. There's a problem. The use of prescribed fires still remain limited, and one of the biggest barriers is the public and institutional fear of escaped fires. The data shows that only a tiny fraction of prescribed burns escape. Those events can be catastrophic and make headlines. So we realized how critical this issue is. There wasn't a systematic long-term analysis of escaped prescribed burns in California. We saw this opportunity to fill that gap by combining multiple data sources together to create the most comprehensive picture to date of when, where, and why prescribed fire escape.
You have anything to add to that, Rob?
For me, the bigger importance of this paper was that prescribed fire in California is really, I'd say, reemerging as a tool that we want to use across the whole landscape. So there's a lot of people getting into it. There's a lot of momentum, a lot of funding around it. And like Shu said, there is always this concern of escape. And it's certainly on the public side, like Shu talked about. And I'd add on the practitioner side, I think most practitioners like me, we know that the risk of escape is very low, but it really is helpful to attach a number to it. So like, what is the probability of escape? The seasonal differences of the probability of escape is super important in terms of factoring in to when we do a prescribed fire. So, for example, I'm doing a prescribed fire today. As soon as I get off this podcast, I'm going to go do a burn, and I can factor in, just what the data show in terms of this time of year. And certainly we really take into account the weather and all these other more site-specific factors. But in the background, if we have this general data across the whole state to give us some information, some data about where escapes tend to occur, they're very rare, but when they do occur, where do they occur, and then what time of year? That's what's super important, I think, to practitioners like me and my colleagues.
Yeah, I could have swore I smelled kerosene, so good luck with that burn, Rob. I know I am giddy with anticipation, but I'm sure the listeners are as well. Shu Lee, tell us about what you found in the study.
Yeah, so we actually have some very interesting findings from this study. The first is timing really matters. So we found that the escapes are most likely to occur in months just before and after the main wildfire season, especially in May, June, or September, November. These months might seem like safe windows for prescribed burning, but they're actually periods when environmental conditions can become volatile, especially with the shifting winds and drying fuels. And the second is that the wind speed stood out as the top environmental factor associated with the escapes. There is another surprising finding is that areas with more prescribed burn experience actually had fewer escapes. So in other words, more frequent use doesn't lead to more risk. And in fact, it seems less likely due to the better trained personnel, improved infrastructure, and more consistent protocols. We also mapped the hotspots of escapes across the United States and found that central northern California had the highest concentrations, especially in and around the Central Valley and the Sierra foothills. That may be due to a lot of agricultural burns concentrated to the private lands, so that may need more attention on the prescribed burns.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. Rob, have you got anything else on that?
Yeah, just a couple things. I wanted to give a real life example of what she was talking about with respect to where prescribed fire is practiced. The risk of escape tends to be lower. An example of that today, if the conditions are a little bit on the dry side, what we can do is choose to burn in an area where we've already burned before, because usually the fuel load is much lower and the heat intensity can be quite a bit lower, usually is lower. And so we factor that in and lower what are already minuscule chances of an escape, lower them even more. And then the other thing I would say in terms of what I found to be an important result of this paper is that we do need better data. We need better data on monitoring of prescribed fires and the escapes of prescribed fire as well. Like having a clear definition of what an escape is and having the public understand what that is, and then having a more comprehensive database. I thought we did as good a job as you can in terms of finding the data that we could, but especially on private lands, and I think this is true in California and other states as well, small burns on private land that can cumulatively add up to a lot, those aren't recorded. There's no really good tracking database for those. So a small landowner just doing prescribed fire, there's just not that level of monitoring. There's room, I think, to increase the monitoring that can go into future calculations of escape probability and improve those estimates in the future.
Yeah, that's really important point. Excellent point. So I'm just thinking there are probably huge management implications for these findings. Julie, do you want to talk about the paper's impact?
So these findings provide a data-driven way to assess the escape risks and refine the burn planning. For the fire managers, they can use this information to avoid high-risk time periods and prioritize the regions for more careful burn protocols and identify vegetation types that need additional attention. And then for scientists, our methods offer a framework for the similar analysis in other fire-prone regions. Our work also highlights the need for more consistent data collection across private and public lands to improve the field fire risk modeling.
Very nice. Rob, were there other impacts that you want to recognize?
One big broad impact that I can think of is contributing data that's out there to the public and available to people who are thinking about the probability of escape. And so one user group of that data are people who are thinking about liability, right? So insurance companies that are in that business of providing liability insurance to practitioners, like this is very important data for them. There have been a few, certainly other estimates of escape, but like Shu's been talking about and what I've been talking about, what we need are more comprehensive estimates. And so to help us zero in on what the actual risk of escape is.
So as I read this paper, it became obvious that one of the big things for management is that what the heck is that appropriate burn window, right? I mean, when do they burn whatever? Shuli, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, our co-author, Jenny, did really good research on the burn window. The meteorological burn window we set here are the ideal times when weather conditions are favorable to implement the prescribed burns. This, of course, changes depending on the ecoregions and climate regions. Also depends on the burn plan objective. In general, winds, humidity, and temperature are considered. Wind speeds from 2 to 10 meters per second can be tricky because higher winds during biking fire can help dissipate heat, resulting in less crowding, while lower winds can reduce dissipation and create more scorching. So that's also the reason we said the wind speed is one of the most influential impacts in the escape events. When develop the burning plan, make sure to take a close look at the wind speed at a time, and also the temperature from 0 to 32 Celsius and the relative humidity at about 30 to 50% would be an appropriate meteorologic burn window for prescribed burn implementation.
So, Rob, what about your burn today? I mean, is there other things you should look at?
I think that one thing that we're finding with this paper and other papers as well are these opportunities for prescribed fire. They're popping up during times of the year where we often assume that we don't have burn windows. So in the winter season, like in the Sierra Nevada, we found that if you're nimble and you're ready to burn during these short windows, they are available, right? So it might be a couple of days here and a couple of days there. They can occur in January, February, really anytime during the winter period. But that's what we're finding in terms of these practitioners who want to maximize their impact and do prescribed fires when they can and when the risk of escape is low, is that maybe they have to start thinking about burning during the times of year when they used to not be able to burn at all.
Sure. Yeah. Last question, Shuli. You want to recognize any co-authors or funding agencies?
Yeah, thank you. I would like to acknowledge all of the co-authors in this paper, Janine, Linya, Professor Rob York, and Master Tata Banerjee. And we would like to acknowledge the funding and the support from U.S. National Science Foundation, U.S. Forest Service, and the University of California Office of the President.
Well, thank you both, Shu Lee and Rob York, for joining us today. If you listeners are interested in this paper, you can download it for free. Shu Lee and her group have already paid the freight for the paper, so you can go ahead and download it for free off our journal website. And it is a darn good paper to read and find out just exactly how to prescribe burn. I want to thank both of you today for joining us. Goodbye, Shu Lee and Rob York.
Thank you, Bob. See you
Goodbye.
later.
And please, everyone, join us again for the next Fire Ecology Chats.
Thank you for listening to Fire Ecology Chats, a podcast series by the Association for Fire Ecology. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to our show and leave us a review. To learn more about fire ecology and support our future work by becoming a member, visit fireecology.org. FIREECOLOGY.org.